All right, good morning. We'll call today's Housing, Urban Development, and Zoning Committee meeting to order. Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Alderman Cone. Alderwoman Schweitzer. Alderwoman Sanye. Alderman Browning. Chair Clark Hubbard.
Here.
Alderman Cone. We have 4 present. We have a quorum.
Okay, with that, I'll move on to approval of the minutes. I'll accept the motion to approve the minutes from Tuesday, October 31st, 2023.
Alderman Cone. Alderwoman Schweitzer. Alderwoman Sanye. Alderman Browning. Chair Clark Hubbard.
Aye.
Alderman Cone. We have 4 aye votes.
Okay, I'll also accept the motion to approve the minutes from Wednesday, November 1st, 2023. Right. Previous roll, so we passed that. I'm going to move our agenda around a little bit because Board Bill 143 was first, but out of respect for my colleagues, the departments, the mayor's administration, our president's office, and the will of the people being able to speak and connect with us more on it, we are not going to call for a vote on 143 today. So with that, I'll move it so that we can discuss if anyone has, any colleagues have any discussion points they want to make in the meeting. So we'll move to item number 2 first. I'll turn it over to Vice Chair Sanye.
Thank you, Alderwoman Clark Hubbard. You are recognized to speak to Board Bill number 157.
Thank you, Vice Chair Sanye. And when Madam Clerk is able, I'm asking that she read the summary for Board Bill 157.
Board Bill number 157, introduced by Alderwoman Shameen Hubbard. A board bill recommended by the Board of Estimate and Apportionment, authorizing the City of St. Louis through its Community Development Administration, CDA, to enter into and execute an agreement to accept the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, funds awarded pursuant to the fiscal year 2023 Brownsfield Grant Competition in the amount of $500,000, appropriating the grant funds, authorizing and directing the Director of CDA to the contract as necessary to expend appropriated funds, directing the Comptroller to issue warrants thereon upon the City Treasury, and containing an emergency clause.
Thank you so much, colleagues. Today I have with me Director Pfeffer and Ms. Rashonda Alexander from CDA that will be present to answer any of your questions and give you a little background on this grant.
Thank you, Alderwoman. And this is really an extremely simple bill. It does 2 things. It authorizes CDA to enter into the grant agreement with the Environmental Protection Agency, and then it appropriates those $500,000 in funds. I had the privilege a few months ago, the EPA actually came to St. Louis to present us with the big $500,000 check. And I put together some remarks for that. So I'm just going to read that. I know it's not what I usually do, but I think it addresses what we're doing here pretty comprehensively. CDA serves as a clearinghouse for the city's federal funds, which we deploy to our private and public partners to build affordable housing, provide social services, and drive various other justice initiatives. Most federal funds require an environmental review, and thus CDA has 3 staff members fully trained on EPA and NEPA requirements. They identified this grant as an opportunity to strengthen and accelerate our environmental review process, and we have already entered into an agreement with professional environmental engineers, that's a firm, not a generic name, professional environmental engineers, PEE, to expand our capacity to quickly and effectively carry out this work. Due to our role in the environmental review process, we see the city's environmental challenges firsthand. Roughly 10% of our projects require some degree of environmental remediation, whether it's removing underground storage tanks, removing and clean filling soil contaminated with heavy metals, or installing radon mitigation systems to protect against vapor from contaminated groundwater. These challenges are all a product of our city's industrial history. The factories, tanneries, brick kilns, machine shops, gas stations, which made St. Louis one of the nation's largest manufacturing hubs throughout the late 1800s and early 1900s. We're looking forward to building on this, on our previous work to conduct 32 Phase 1 assessments, 12 Phase 2 assessments, and 6 cleanup plans, with a particular focus on our historically contaminated industrial riverfront, CDA-funded projects, and economic justice demonstration areas. That's it in a nutshell. The budget is included on the Exhibit A, which is the grant agreement between CDA and EPA. The key page is page 3, which shows that the vast majority of these funds, $457,000 out of the $500,000, are going to cover direct contractual costs with PEE to provide environmental assessments, and the remainder are just some fringes and personnel and equipment. With that, that brings my remarks to a close. Happy to answer any questions. And we do have Rashonda Alexander, City Executive with CDA, and our, among many other duties, our environmental review guru, if you have any detailed questions about the process, which is beyond my ken. Yes.
All right. I'm Rashonda Alexander with CDA, so I can filter any questions pertaining to this brownfield grant with the EPA and possibly identify some priority sites if that is required or needed.
Okay, we can go in order of seniority for questions. Alderman Cohen.
Thank you. My apologies for tardiness, but I almost got T-boned on South Grand on my way here. So nerves are a little rattled. My apologies. Just brownfield tax credits, grant application. You mentioned site selection. What's the criteria for that? How are we going to go through a site selection process?
So we submitted for 32 Phase 1 ESAs. We have identified some sites, have not solidified them in particular because, of course, we need your permission to do so. But we do have some in queue, specifically 5715 West Florissant, which is next to a gas station that was identified as a priority site. Of course, Noel had mentioned our riverfront as another option. And then we have over 11 congressional earmarks from the community project funding with our congresswoman that are considered as well. And then if particular alders had priority sites that you would like to bring to CDA, of course, we would consider those as well.
Are these city-owned properties? Are they privately owned, or does it matter for the purposes of the grant?
Yeah, so it doesn't matter for the purposes of the grant. However, to move the money expediently over the 4 years, we do want city-owned with city interest, so we're able to move the funding as quickly as we so agreed.
And that would include, just to be clear, like LRA properties as well?
Absolutely.
Okay. And the LRA properties that might already be in some sort of queue with MoDNR, Missouri Department of Natural Resources. I'm just curious because I have an old gas station site that's now LRA owned in my ward. I've been told for many years that, it's on a list with MoDNR for the purposes of like tank removal, environmental remediation. It's been 15 years. There's literally been nothing done with that site except for, we got the structure torn down on it so that I don't get calls from people trying to reopen a gas station there. So how are we handling properties like that have already submitted applications or already in a queue with MoDNR for environmental remediation?
So what we would do is contact them about that site in particular and have them pull it, and we would fund it.
Okay.
So you can just say, hey, Rashonda, this is the site.
Yeah,
to work.
5318 Virginia.
Got it.
And if I may make a quick clarification, these are not brownfield tax credit funds. They're brownfield site assessment funds, so they can't be used for the literal remediation. They are for us to assess the site's environmental issues. And in some cases, we will also be doing 6 cleanup plans as well, but they're not for the implementation of those plans.
Thank you. And understood. I'm just not familiar with where these properties are in that process either, in terms of, I've just been told by LRA for many years that it's in a queue. So I don't know if that means that it's been through the assessment and they're just waiting for the funding for the remediation or what have you. So, it would be, I just want to make sure that that's something that you all are working with LRA on, in terms of, a list of any former gas stations or properties adjacent to gas stations, things of that nature, that may have already been submitted to MoDNR, or pending MoDNR approval for these types of assessments and evaluations. I think that would be a pretty logical first step. So that's all the questions I have. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you. Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here today and for giving us this information. Can you talk a little bit more about, you mentioned a queue of certain projects. How do projects get on that list? How do you rank them? Just a little bit more of that background would be interesting to me.
Yeah, so it was based on some projects that, as Alderman Cohen suggested, we already knew about from consultation with LRA, with the Vacancy Collaborative, with our housing development team. And so, and in consultation with SLDC, we were able to identify some projects that were city-owned and CDA-owned. And knowing that the environmental review process is a requirement for any HUD funds, we knew that we could be supportive of the CPF awards from our Congresswoman.
Okay, but there's not like a list that exists in perpetuity that you all know about or manage and is passed down when certain projects don't. I mean, I'm sure we don't clean up every brownfield we know about every single year, so.
Yes, we don't have that list at this point, but all I was going to add is that it also is in response to when a project hits a roadblock, in terms of typically the responsibility to fund the environmental review falls on the project. So the congressional earmarks that Rashonda mentioned are a great example. There's 11 of these congressional earmarks that Congresswoman Bush and others fought to appropriate to send to St. Louis. But now, before they get access to those funds, those projects need to conduct those environmental reviews, and they are technically and formally responsible for funding those. But some of those developers or projects don't have that liquidity. So this is an example where we can come in with this funding source and say, actually, we can fund the environmental review and move the project forward. So part of the way that we prioritize this list is just what project is up against a wall and stuck for want of funding for environmental review.
So if we have a parcel that we know is a problem, but there's no next step for that project, kind of keeps falling to the bottom of the list.
If there's not, we also have a proactive set of projects that we want to have developed, but it's a combination of both factors. But in general, our approach is, we don't have a formal prioritization index or set of factors. That's something that perhaps we can discuss with the Vacancy Collaborative to establish, because that's something we are looking to establish for other programs. So we can look into that, but we always welcome your recommendations or suggestions.
Thank you. And did you say how many projects you think this would fund?
Yeah, so it's 32
32.
phase 1 assessments, but also 6 cleanup planning, 10 phase 2s. That's when you do identify a level of contamination on the site and you need to do some further testing. And then 13 asbestos and lead surveys. So this does not involve cleanup, but what it will do is give us a chance to identify those things that do need cleanup. So when we have our next meeting with the EPA, we can show them all of the demand that's needed. And instead of $500,000 for assessments, we can ask for $5 million for cleanup.
Okay, this is really interesting. Thank you so much for your time and answering questions.
Alderman Browning.
Thank you. I think all of my questions have been answered at this point. Really appreciate this next step, and I understand the importance of this, so excited to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have like an ideal date in line if alders do want to help identify sites for assessment? Is there a timeline in mind that you'd like us to submit that to you by?
So anytime between now and probably first quarter of 2024 would be great. But to be very clear, it's 8 phase 1 assessments over 4 years.
Understood. And this is, just to be clear, this has no connection to, I know the Congresswoman and some other folks at EPA were working on identifying some of the odors and things that are in parts of South City. This is a separate measure from that. I just want to be clear because I got an email about it from a constituent today. So I just put that on.
Yes, it's separate.
Okay, thank you. I think for me, that is all of my questions. Alderwoman Clark Hubbard, I don't know if you want to close out now.
Yes, thank you, Director Pfeffer, and thank you, Ms. Alexander, for being here this morning. With that, I would ask for your favorable consideration and a due pass recommendation for Bill 157.
I make a motion that we pass Board Bill 157 with a due pass recommendation.
Second,
Previous roll.
objection.
Okay. Hearing an objection, Madam Clerk, may you please call the roll? And may you please also add me as co-sponsor?
Aye.
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 Thank you. And with your votes, you voted to sustain the motion of passing Board Bill 157 with a due pass recommendation.
All right, thank you. We'll move forward in the agenda back to item number 1, which was reviewing Board Bill 143, which was a committee sub. Also, so again, like I mentioned before, this will be an opportunity, out of respect for my colleagues in our mayor's administration, the president's office, the directors of these departments who implement these funds, our constituency basis that we are continuing to hear from. We are not going to call for a vote today on Board Bill 143 committee sub. We're going to continue to do the work that we're called to do, which is have conversations. And get it to a place that is a benefit for the greater good. So I would like to now go in seniority through the committee to see if my colleagues have any questions. We did receive some correspondence today from some of the questions we had in a prior hearing, but just know that this is an opportunity for us, it's most especially publicly, if we have any questions that we want to hear from our mayor's administration, the president's office, the directors of the departments, in any direction that we want to continue to go. And also know that budgets like this, if you can show one budget like this, that the where it stays, where it was first presented is where it stays, you're a winner, you know, because I've never seen a budget, a moving budget like this. And so, hey, I'm hearing that there may be some additional funding. When anytime you're pulling and re-looking at things like this, that's why we have an amazing director, Paul Payne, here in the city of St. Louis, that's able to re-look and deep dive. And when we ask, you know, he always is considerable about showing us, you know, the different directions and the pathways we can go for this. So again, this is just the opportunity for us to speak on this. We're not calling for a vote, but I wanted to make sure that all of my colleagues here, most especially on the committee and in present here today, if they had anything they wanted to share, they had the opportunity. So with that, Alderman Cone.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You just mentioned that there were additional answers or comments that were shared with us today. Can you let me know where those were shared? I'm not seeing anything on any of the drives.
I think it was emailed to us directly, and then would it be shared to the drive?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm not. Oh, I see the email from Casey.
Yeah, I just re-forwarded it to you.
Okay. Sorry, that email or inbox is pretty full these days. So I appreciate you kind of kicking this off by saying that we're not taking a vote on this today is, I haven't had the opportunity to review and digest Ms. Milberg's response yet, but certainly do have questions around some of those. So I'll wait until I have the opportunity to review that before asking any further questions. Thank you.
Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing for this discussion and a time to discuss some of the questions that came up last week during the meeting. One of the things that came up during the meeting that especially struck me was when the Board of Public Service Director, Rich Bradley, or President rather, Rich Bradley, said that there wasn't enough money allocated for the corridor projects to finish them. And those are some of the biggest paving and street calming projects that the city's done in a long, long time. And I feel like it's really important to get those projects finished. So, I've sent questions to the administration on how much money is left that will be needed to finish those projects. What's the plan to finish those projects? How much time will those projects need? Questions like that. I sent similar questions regarding the public safety answering point, which is costing the city a lot of money and is being funded from a few different sources now. City and state American Rescue Plan Act funds, and I'm sure I'm missing something there, but there's still a funding gap. So I wanted to know what the plan was to fill that funding gap, seeing as we so often hear in City Hall, and at least my constituents tell me all the time that safety of our streets, the quality of our streets, and the safety in general, the answering of 911, the things that they care about more than anything else. So I want to make sure that we're prioritizing any reallocated funds in that way. And I'd also said in the past that with raising of the water rates in the city of St. Louis, and the reason we weren't using ARPA funds to help offset some of the water rate increase that I supported, obviously, and we supported on the board, was because the ARPA funds had already been allocated. That's why the funds from American Rescue Plan Act weren't being used to support water infrastructure. Well, here we are at a time where we're reallocating ARPA funds, and the Water Division's asks are not included in the reallocation. So the Water Division did provide, I think, 10 different things that they feel like are the most important critical infrastructure needs of the Water Division. A handful of those things are $6 million or less projects. So I asked, had those been considered? And, obviously we're on a timeline. We are at a very tight timeline. So there are going to be some projects that, while very important to the city, aren't going to be able to meet that timeline. So it's not like we can just say, well, the most important thing is X and we're doing X if it's X isn't going to fit into the timeline. So I also asked questions about that and questions about the one allocation that sort of stood out to me is the Board of Aldermen had allocated some funds for the safe encampments, and some of that money that was allocated for safe encampments was directed to the tiny home village. And so I asked, why that was. Did any other money from American Rescue Plan Act funds get moved around in that way where it's the same category but not exactly the same intent? And I wanted to know if that had happened anywhere else. I think that's important information to have as the Board of Aldermen, as well as if the money for safe encampments is somehow not going to be, if they're thinking that it's not going to be used, then there's money to reallocate to homeless services or into the corridors, or if that money will be used for its intended purpose. Because at the end of the day, this is $5.8 million that we're considering reallocating at this time, which is just such, even though it's a large amount of money, it's such a small amount of the overall $510 million. 510 or 498? I hear both. Do we know? So a huge amount of money that the city had allocated from American Rescue Plan Act funds, and 5.8 is obviously a very small percentage of that fund. So knowing there's we'd be having a lot different discussion if we were talking about the reallocation of $20 million or $30 million instead of 5.8. So I want to make sure that while we're having the reallocation discussion, we are considering what, if any, money is going to come, additional funds are going to come back to be reallocated, that we're aware of that, because the decisions start to look a lot different when we're talking about $5.8 million versus perhaps I'm just throwing out, $20 million. So I want to make sure that I know that before I vote on this reallocation. And I also asked for the plan for, continuous updates on the spending of American Rescue Plan Act funds, and making sure that this body, this committee, would be hearing from them regularly as we get closer and closer to the 2024, December 31st, 2024 deadline of having all of the money programmed. So, and we saw the difference between what is programmed now versus where they need to go in a year. So just concerns about staying on track and making sure that the city is on track to program and spend every dollar of that federal funding in a way that we can. So I asked a lot of questions about that. Also, for the medical debt piece and the tenants fund piece, there aren't board bills, especially on the tenants piece yet, to know how that money would be used. So I was interested in knowing more about the programming of those funds. And I did discuss this with the president's office yesterday. And I've sent questions to the mayor's office. So just kind of an update of where I am on all this. So my constituents who may be watching know what questions I've asked. I tried to be really clear about priorities of safety and our streets, and especially finishing projects that are so important that we've started. And this money is a one-time thing. So if we're looking for other funding sources, those funds can be used for other things, whereas this money is going to run out. So we want to make sure we use every dollar. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the time to discuss it, and I'm look forward to hearing answers to all those questions, all the great questions that you all have said. Thank you.
Alderman Browning.
Thank you. I echo the Alderwoman from the first comments and share many of the same concerns that we're budgeting these, piecemeal. And if we are aware of the full amount that's coming back, we might be able to allocate them in a way that will actually help us complete some of our goals. Specifically, the corridor paving project is something that I hear about from my constituents a lot. We need to make sure that we are having that we have enough money to get these projects done that we've already told people we would get done. And so, when the city tells people that we're going to do something and then we don't fully fund it, that is where distrust in government really grows. And I don't want to see that. I want to keep our promises and make sure that we address the needs in our city, specifically making sure that we make our streets safer. Those are big, expensive projects, and it's important that we allocate the right amount of money to get those done. With costs rising, we need to revisit that. And so I echo again Alderwoman Schweitzer's comments and stand in a very similar position to her as far as how we're planning the use of these funds and getting some of those questions answered. Thank you.
Vice Chair Sanya.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. I agree with a lot of what Alderwoman Schweitzer and Alderman Browning said. I would like to know from the administration directly what they're thinking in terms of reallocation and what is the total amount on the floor. I know right now we're in November, but maybe we could have like, hey, over the next 6 months or over the next whatever 8 months, here's what we thinking the total amount that needs to be reallocated, because it feels like we're just having not a full holistic conversation. And also so that I can tell constituents and folks in the community if there are things that they're looking to see, it would be great if I did have a timeline to let them know, because I do have people that have reached out now about in terms of this allocation. And there are things that I could say, hey, this is the plan for now. And if we're planning to come back and visit some other funds in 6 months, we can start that conversation. But I think it would be helpful if we could just get that information from the administration on what is the total amount that is looking to be reallocated, maybe possibly even over the next 12 months. So then as a board, we can kind of have those conversations. And then I will also echo the piece about the corridor paving project, the piece about the intentional encampment versus the teeny homes, making sure that money we have spent collected, accurately. And then I think there was something else I can't remember, but I know there was about 3 projects, and I also, similar to Alderwoman Schweitzer, reached out about the corridor pavement project, started conversations about public restrooms, and just trying to look at like what are the things that have already been in the works and been in communication. So I would definitely, I'm glad we're not taking a vote today, and I think, maybe the administration taking a look and talking to us about what they're thinking in terms of the next 6 months to a year so that we can have more of a holistic plan rather than, piece by piece, one by one, which doesn't help us to see the full picture as we're making decisions. Thank you.
All right, Alderman Aldridge.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Especially thank you for what you always do, led me to weigh in on it, not being a member of the committee. I would say, even though I can't vote on this in committee, it's once it comes to the floor, be a voting member. And I also kind of want to echo some concerns from my colleagues, especially the way that we're going about the ARPA funds. Being a new member, it would be nice to see a holistic approach on how many funds are actually going to be called back. What is the priority that we'll be using these funds for, instead of, I think one of the members saying, by like piecemealing it out. I'm sure there's going to have to be more funds called back. And we also know when they do get called back and reallocated and reprogrammed, that takes time. And that was something that our comptroller, Ms. Green, talked about. So I know there's an urgency to get this done. And I know we also are going on break here shortly, but it would be nice for, at least as a new member who's been following along, to be able to see exactly what is the mayor's priority on trying to figure out how do we roll all these funds back. And also kind of agree that I know the 2.4 million for public safety, or the 2.4 million that's going for a study, I think that probably could be utilized a little differently. I know Commissioner Bradley had also talked about the corridors not being funded. I think if we're going to be spending 2.4 on a study, I think it can just be to reduce crime. There's some other priorities when it comes to infrastructure that we really could be investing those dollars in. But again, Madam Chair, I appreciate you letting me weigh in on it and put my 2 cents.
All right, with that, I'm circling back. Does anyone else have any comments? The thing about it, I know it's been mentioned by my colleagues here about time, and that is a very big factor in how this is moving. And I will push back on the piecemeal comparison, only because I think if the administration, or if any of us here at this committee or the board as a whole would have known this money wasn't going to be programmed the way we were originally prepared to do when we went through passing the legislation to do it the first time, then we would have never expected this. And what's happening is the people that are overseeing these programs and overseeing the legislation we did, and the money, the funding part, are seeing now, sometimes hearing from directors and from program directors that they're not going to be able to do it. So that's where this reprogramming is coming from, or they are seeing themselves. They are able to look at programs and see this is not going to happen within this time. So we need to either redirect or reprogram. I used this example last time with the I misspoke last time about it too, but the reproductive fund. Yes. I use that as an example. Yes, wholeheartedly, we all believed in it. We all voted for it on the tape. But now we see through the lawsuit and through the climate that we're in now, that that's not going to get spent. So the reprogramming of that is coming directly from the mission, trying to stay in the same vein. Is that I understand everybody's inquiries, and I agree with them, especially about projects being done. Because if it's one thing we as auditors hear about all the time, is when something was allocated, when is it going to get done? Why hasn't it been done yet? Years later. And why? And so if this is a funding piece and we are able to bridge that and plug that gap with this, I absolutely agree with that. But I do think that we have to keep in mind about what you said, Alderman Ms. Schweitzer, in a way that we can. And I'm glad that you put amounts on there so that nobody can come and say, well, we have this thing that we want to do. We want to change the sky purple, and it's going to cost $7 million. And I see you have $7 million in ARPA funds. No, that's not the way it works. And so I'm so glad that we're all up here working together on this and going to continue to work together on this. Again, moving in the same vein, the same mission of what the ARPA funds were awarded to the city of St. Louis for, which is what a lot of these programs feel, making sure that we can reprogram them that way and then get it done. But I do think that holding off to see the total amount that'll be pulled back is not, that's a time gap that we just can't afford to take right now. So if we have this opportunity here or where we were elected and to do, which is legislate and get this money reprogrammed and moved the way that it be, trusting in departments and our president's office and our mayor's administration and the comptroller's office, which all have to play a part in how money moves in the city of St. Louis, not just one person, not just one entity, then that's the way we'll be able to get it done and move forward collectively for the greater good, collectively. So with that, we are going to again hold this. We'll discuss it again next week's meeting. We'll have some further discussions on housing here in the city of St. Louis, as well as some legislation, and we'll come back to 143 committee sub if we're ready. Okay, so do we have any written testimony, Madam Clerk, for
We
tonight?
have none.
Okay, any announcements today?
Just a reminder that the HUD meeting that was planned for tonight at 6 p.m. is canceled. Just a reminder of that.
With that announcement, then I'll add that instead of coming to the HUD meeting, not instead of, but we would have still came. We would have been here. But since we don't have that meeting tonight, you all can join the mayor's cabinet in the community at 6 p.m. at Herbert Hoover on Grand, where all of her as well as her cabinet, which means her directors of departments, will be there in the space where you can directly connect with them and ask questions. A lot of questions that we get. This is a good time. I invited most of my constituents to come, even though it's not in the ward that I serve in. It's important for us to support the entire city because our needs are all the same. So having inviting you all out to that cabinet in the community, because these are the questions that you can get answered, even when you might not believe us when we answer them, because you hear from us or don't hear from us so much. But take advantage of the opportunity to talk to the people that are really doing the work. All right, with that, I will accept the motion to, we don't need any excuse because we're all here, so a motion to adjourn. Everybody have a blessed day.